My Grandmother's Cupboard, written and read by Bill Lenihan. I remember my grandmother with mixed feelings, and I'm not sure to this day whether I remember her with fondness or loathing for what she did. I have lived my whole life with this inner turmoil, the guilt of my mixed emotions. After all, who am I to judge? She was just a product of her time, wasn't she? I remember the times were hard for those around us, and she was always willing to help. So much so that sometimes it seemed we had a stream of people coming to the house, and it was a joy to see their smiling faces as they left. At least I seem to remember them smiling. Do I? I always wondered how Gran could keep such happiness for people in one cupboard. It was always kept locked and too high for me to reach. Well, it was too high then, and when I was young, that was. Although I knew where the key was kept, I preferred to think the cupboard was too high, and that would always be too high. In my mind's eye, I can see the streets where we lived, even though they'd gone, long gone, which could only be a blessing. Terraced houses with gardens and tired front doors. Everything was grey. Even when the sun shone, it was grey. Grey with smoke, soot, and degradation. I used to look through the window and watch children playing in the street. They wore rags. Yes, rags, dirty rags. And I was never allowed to play with them. When I asked why, she said, if you catch something off them, you'll die. And I remember thinking, if I caught something from them that would make me die, why didn't they die? But then they did. Yes, they did. Lots of them died. We lived in an end of terrace house with its very own toilet out the back that no one else was allowed to use. I used to wonder why they'd want to if they had their own. But they didn't. Not then. You shared a toilet and everything that went with it. Was that why so many children died? Probably. The house also had a basement with a rickety step that creaked when you stood on it. But I wasn't allowed in the basement because that's where Gran kept her cupboard. I knew this because when I was small, I once crept down there, and I can remember the smell. Although I don't know what it was. Well, I wasn't sure then, but I know now. And sometimes when I'm in bed between awake and asleep, I still smell it. That smell. The basement had a small window near the ceiling to let in daylight, seldom sunlight, as it could never get through the smoke and soot. I remember sitting on the cold flagstone floor in a beam of light coming through the window and listening to my own sobs filled with fear before Mother came to fetch me. I would never venture to the basement again. Well, not until the men came. But I often stood in the doorway at the top of the stairs to look down at Grandmother's cupboard, wondering what secrets lay within. But I knew the secrets. I think I always did. It wasn't long after my mother found me crying in the basement that I heard noises, hushed voices, moaning, and I thought I heard a scream. I told my mother, but she said I dreamt it, that it was just a bad dream. It's funny what mothers will tell their children and expect them to believe, and I wanted to believe her, even though I knew it wasn't true. I did hear the screams. I always heard the screams, and always during the night, when Grandmother was in the basement, always that night, I still hear them, the screams. Grandmother was a big woman, and everyone called her Ticky. There would be a knock at the door, and the creak of hinges as it opened, and I would hear Gran say, "Come in, love. This will only take a Ticky." I can see Gran sat before me, always wearing one of those wraparound aprons, covered in stains. I can't really recall her face, but I remember the stains. She would hold her hands out to me to go to her, but I wouldn't go. I was afraid of the stains, and she would laugh at me as she sat in her armchair that smelled of the basement. I remember that laugh, those stains, and the smell, always a smell, but never a face. Why, I don't know, but never a face. I was 16 when they came knocking. They said someone had died, bled to death. That was all they said as they pushed past us, carrying picks and shovels. None of them said another word, but they made us watch, me and Mam, as they removed the flagstones in the basement. One of the workmen shouted, "Yeah, yeah." He pulled up a flagstone for the corner, opposite the window. The grey light from the window shone upon it, as if showing him the way. We just stood looking at Mam and me. It was as if there were a chamber below it. It was filled with small bundles wrapped in newspaper. They laid a sheet out on the ground and were placing the bundles, only little bundles they were. At first, I couldn't make out what they were. Then I saw what they were. Through the flickering shadows cast by the light, I saw what they were. Babies. They were babies. Some were so tiny, they could have nestled in my cupped hands. The man in charge looked at us, me and Mam. He was a steer. I remember well his words. "Do you have knowledge of these diabolical acts?" He'd hoped for a reply, but I just shook my head. Mam said nothing, but I could still hear her sobs. Grandmother's cupboard was open, stacked with all sorts of things, labelled jars filled with I don't know what. But I remember the tongs. Shiny they were, and other shiny things too. I didn't know what they were, but I knew what they were used for. Obvious, really. They took Gran away. She swore no one else knew what went on in the basement. I always wanted to believe I hadn't, but I had. I mean, it's the way things were then. It wasn't really Gran's fault, or the woman who came to the door. What were they supposed to do? Who else could they turn to? No one. I'm old now, and as I sit in my armchair and reflect, I think life's been good to me, and I've tried to be good and give something back to the children in my care. People said my Gran was evil, that she made lots of money from what she did. But I don't think she was evil. She did what she did, and people who came to her were glad of it. Things were different in them days.